Hey there, Mary Kristen. Just wanted to have some notes for you for this week's reading. Of course, that reading is entitled Search for a System, and I would like you to write that on the top of your page in your notebook for this week's questions. So, when obviously the title says it all, so scientists decided they needed to come up with a specific system in order to classify living things. Now, if you'll remember, Aristotle started with his observations, and then Linnaeus came along and is really basically known as the father of classification. And if you'll also remember, classification is basically how we organize things according to certain characteristics. Taxonomy, on the other hand, is the science of classification. So anyway, I'm going to tie in one of your vocabulary words from last week, subjective. And if you'll remember that, I'm asking you to do a lot of remembering, but if you'll remember, that word has to do with people's personal opinions or their perspectives. And even for scientists, specifically those that study taxonomy, those that are called taxonomists, it's their personal observations from their study and their research. So if you have more than one person, more than one taxonomist, you are going to have a very likely chance of those people having different ideas. And of course, that's what we see in this week's reading. Now, one person's idea, perspective, research is not necessarily better than the other. Some people's research might be based on more current information, but for our purposes, our study this week is going to be on a 5-kingdom system. Now, some scientists believe that there were 2. Others believe 3, 4, or 5, but we're going to focus on a 5-kingdom system. So what taxonomists believe is that all living things can be grouped or classified into one of these 5 categories: either a Monera, a protist, a fungi, a plant, or an animal. Specifically this week, we're going to be talking about plants and animals. Later during the school year, we'll be talking about these other 3 categories, and we'll be actually mentioning Monera today as well. So classification system takes into account observed differences. Now, these observed differences comes from their 5, a taxonomist or a scientist, 5 senses: what they see, what they touch, what they hear. So any observation, any difference that they can notice that helps them distinguish between organisms, that's going to help them indicate which one would be a plant or an animal, or even more specific, what type of plant or what type of animal. Through the years, our advancements in technology have allowed us to determine differences for the first time. For example, bacteria, this is kind of a blown up, obviously a picture of bacteria down here on the bottom right corner, have a completely different cell type than all of the other 4 groups of living things. A bacteria belongs over here in the Monera category. What makes them different, what sets them apart, is that they are unicellular, which means one-celled, and they do not have a nucleus. They do not have a control center for the cell. Now, a fancy word for that is prokaryotic. So bacteria are considered prokaryotic. They're also considered unicellular. They have been grouped, like I mentioned before, into a separate kingdom called the Monera kingdom. Interestingly enough, and obviously it's going to make sense, the prefix mon or mono, sorry for the typo, means one. So again, bacteria belong here. They are one-celled, they are unicellular organisms. They are prokaryotic, which means they do not have a nucleus. The way I remember that is pro rhymes with no. No nucleus. These other 4 categories, they're going to be considered eukaryotic organisms, meaning their cells each have a nucleus. So again, we're going to kind of revisit this taxonomic classification. And if we look, if we started at the very top of the triangle, which we don't spend too much time on, the domain is eukarya, because remember, we are focusing on the living things right now, plants and animals. And so living things are considered eukaryotic organisms, okay, because all of their cells have nuclei in them. But specifically this week, we're talking about this kingdom section right here. Underneath the kingdom section, if we are talking about plants, our next section down, our next taxa, our next level down is considered to be a division. As you can see over here, it says in talking about plants, the term division is usually used. Sometimes you're going to see phylum, but it is less commonly used. However, either term is correct, but what you're going to see in your reading is when we are talking about plants, you're going to see that they belong to the Plantae or plant kingdom, and then the very next level, the very next taxa down, you're going to see division. So if you see something that has a Plantae kingdom, belongs to the Plantae kingdom, and something that has a division to it, that's your key that we are obviously talking about a specific plant, okay? The plant kingdom represents about 400,000 different species, okay? So one example is a fern that's up here in the top right corner. Obviously, it belongs to the plant kingdom and the Pteridopsida division. So that is one way, that is just the beginning of how we classify a fern. Another example, a poinsettia, a flower you may see at Christmas. Obviously, it also belongs to the plant kingdom. And the next step down, the next taxa, down on that upside down list we were talking about earlier, this one right here, we go kingdom, we go phylum. It belongs to the Anthophyta division. Now, plants and animals, when they go from the kingdom, plant kingdom, down to the next step, it tells us the words that they use, most of them are in Latin, give us a little clue about something specific, a specific characteristic about that plant or animal. So just keep that in mind for later. That may stand out to you a little bit in your reading. The next kingdom, of course, is the animal kingdom. It represents about 1 million different species. So remember, plants have about 400,000, animals have about 1 million. So obviously the animal kingdom is larger than the plant kingdom. And most of that comes from the variety of insects that we have. I know that is crazy. But anyway, the animal kingdom represents about 1 million different species. So I've gone through and I've given you some examples. So since we're talking about the animal kingdom, the next step down we're going to talk about under kingdom is phylum. Squid belong to the animal kingdom and to the mollusca phylum. So of course, here's our friend the squid. Dolphins, one of my favorite animals. Of course, we know that is a mammal. He also belongs to the animal kingdom and belongs to the Chordata phylum. Chordata means backbone. So any animal that you see with the Chordata phylum, that lets you know they have a backbone. Water bears, on the other hand, yes, there is something called a water bear. They're kind of cute. They are microscopic, as you can tell. Also belong to the animal kingdom and the Arthropoda phylum. Now, what's interesting I want you to point out is 1, 2, 3 of these animals, all 3 live in water. All 3 belong to the animal kingdom, but all 3 belong to different phylum. And obviously, they look very different. Their characteristics are very different. That's why they belong to different phylum. Taxonomy helps us bring order to the understanding of the immense diversity of life. You could probably go on and list animals, and you would never be able to list them all. So taxonomy is one way, one tool that scientists use to help them study nature, living things in an orderly manner. And remember, I'm just going to kind of give a step back to last week, a flashback. A dichotomous key is one of those tools that taxonomists use. If you remember I'm kind of running out of, my throat's getting a little dry. A dichotomous key The prefix die means two. So if you remember, we talked about having two different choices. So I wanted to mention that because I believe you're going to see a question coming up about that. But anyway, this is just kind of a quick overview of what you've been reading this week. I just wanted you to have it available for you. So as you go through and answer questions, feel free to look through the slideshow I'm going to send you. It's going to be the same slideshow that you see here, but you won't have to listen to me talk again. Refer back to this video or refer to your notes to help you answer. One last thing I want to just remind you of. Remember, as you do your questions, when you get a grade back, don't think that is your final grade. Okay, so I just wanted to remind you of that. Just do your best. And that also helps me know what I need to go over with you next time we're together. Okay, so that's it for the search for system. And I'm going to send you an email with your directions for your assignments for the week. Hope you have a great week. Good luck this weekend. I will talk to you later.